Hello, hello, and welcome to the only podcast where we wonder how much gin Qui-Gon drank, how often Veers veered, and how often Watto blows his wad. I'm Matt,
I'm Luke.
And I'm Max.
and this is Force for Thought. Hello, and welcome back to Force for Thought. Sorry, we're having a dirty joke this episode in the top half. Today we're talking about Star Wars Legacy. And talking about the characters and kind of how we see them in their real world, how they're viewed in the universe, and also just kind of doing some character overviews. Does anybody have a character they want to start off with? I know right before we started recording, we chatted about this. Also, did you guys like the intro joke? I thought that was very funny. I forgot I wrote that down once again at 4 a.m. while watching my son.
I enjoyed it. It was similar to Luke's formats where I know what the punchline is, but I'm still not quite quick enough to get it before it's said.
Yeah,
Hell
I
yeah.
buy your joke, Matthew. I love a good pun. I'm sure
Hell yeah.
that's not a surprise to the listeners who've been listening for a couple months now.
Anyway,
in
do
terms
you want
of
to
a
start
character,
with a... Yes.
I would think Luke Skywalker because I think he's the most apt for this discussion. But just for posterity, we are not discussing the Star Wars Legacy comic series that I read and did a Force for Thought on last year, which I keep thinking you're about to say when you say Star Wars Legacy. We're talking about the legacy of individual characters, both in universe
Yes,
and out
characters'
of universe.
legacies. Yes, exactly.
But if
yeah.
you're interested on our opinions
Especially-
of the Legend comic book, go check out our previous episode.
Yes, a lot of people have, and I'd say it's the most popular one we have, actually. Well, Luke's explanation for it. But yeah, I was thinking, a lot of this came up, I feel like, when I was thinking of the new Luke Skywalker at Galaxy's Edge, and how nobody looks like him.
What's the new Luke
He's-
Skywalker? Like the actor, the guy that you can go meet Luke?
Yeah. Yes, but they all look very, very weird, and I was like, this is going to be a weird part of his legacy now that it's always going to be like that weird Luke Skywalker that people keep posting, and it all looks like it literally, like there's a couple of them that looks like Amy Poehler in disguise and just looks like Luke
Aw.
Skywalker. Like imagine Amy Poehler with a wig on. Like that's what a lot of these look like. And I was like, that's a weird thing. And then, going through specifically with Luke Skywalker, I was thinking, these moments, these key beats and how we see him in the real world versus how people see him in universe. And I think sometimes people get those maybe misconstrued, which is where Last Jedi kind of comes into play and stuff too. But then also we have different characters like Darth Plagueis, which I kind of want to talk about, Grogu, and believe it or not, I do want to talk about Greef Karga in this context as well. But yeah, if you want to talk about Luke Skywalker first, I mean, obviously his first appearance is in A New Hope. He is the person that we are seeing and introduced into this world. But obviously his key moments in like evolution too throughout his journey, I feel like are the most impressive and yet also the rockiest. I feel like with where you,
Yeah.
Luke,
I mean,
you give a face.
the when I think about legacy, my mind instantly goes to Luke Skywalker, and it's interesting the more I thought about it because there's in-universe legacy and out-of-universe legacy, and Luke is the epitome of both at different times, where after the original trilogy, he is like in all of pop culture, his legacy has the most impact on real-world people. Like growing up in the 80s and 90s, from what I've been told, like he is everyone's hero and idol, and he is the ultimate embodiment of good and right and sticking to your virtues and doing what's right. And then, but in universe, which I guess isn't exactly true, but it's the way I always understood it, and I still kind of do, Luke Skywalker is like a myth, a legend. He's not that real of a person, and it's just like a story because, at the end of the day, his experience was his own, and then everyone on the Death Star died, and he just went along telling that story, and it could have been anything. But then sort of the opposite happened in The Last Jedi in the sequels, where in universe, he becomes a legend and the ultimate embodiment of good and right and a hero to all the school kids everywhere. But out of universe, no one really cares, and people are upset about his character arc and how that he died too soon or whatever. Whether I agree with that or not, I don't, but that's not what I'm talking about. I just think it's funny that you could do one of two things with legacy, and he did both of them at different times while simultaneously not doing the other.
Yes, I agree, because I think there was something so confusing about Luke with that because of that. Is because after the original trilogy, he just takes on a life of his own because he has such a different progress from when he's a whiny little kid on Tatooine to when he is doing, ultimate sacrifices basically in Return of the Jedi and like sticking up for, what he believes in and who he believes in. And then he almost, because he does that in such a heroic moment, there's nowhere really to go but down. I feel like that's why I feel like also in the sequel trilogy, it makes the most sense for him to not, how do you live up to that standard? Like, it's impossible to be able to do all of that. And so I think that's an interesting aspect too of like legacy is like, what your legacy is only as far as you are. Like, when people say like, the good die young, it's because some people end on top and their legacy stops, and their legacy continues because their life stopped, and that's what they're remembered for. You think of like people like in the real world, very much unlike Star Wars, but you think of people like Kurt Cobain and Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, who were all idolized because they died when they were 27 years old and they didn't have time to dip down. They didn't have time to Dave Grohl, and all of a sudden you're having affairs and secret children and, and all this stuff too, and you're just kind of like, oh, his legacy is now a little bit tarnished.
Exactly. I'm not that into music, but I like basketball, and that's how I feel about Kobe Bryant. Like, he had rape allegations, and he was like a really good basketball player. But it's like that Luke quote: "Now that they're gone, the Jedi are romanticized and deified. But if you strip away the myths and look at their actions, the legacy of the Jedi is failure." Not that Kobe's legacy is a failure, but I think he is very conflated because he died young. And it bums me out because people say that also about Heath Ledger, that he wouldn't have won that Oscar for The Dark Knight. I think he would have, but who knows?
I agree. Dark Knight was so good. The Joker is so good too.
I
his
know.
performance is crazy. We're looking at 2008 specifically. I don't know who else he was up against, but I'm pretty confident he would have won that as well.
It doesn't help that, like, you can't deny that it could only help his chances that he died.
Yeah. Something else with it, yeah, it's true. With like Luke's legacy specifically, I feel like a lot of people, their death is part of it, but weirdly, I feel like it's not for Luke Skywalker, because I feel like Luke Skywalker, like you said, Luke, he is such a that's confusing. He is so otherworldly in and out of universe that people think about him in the original trilogy more, I'd say, than the sequel trilogy. And just because he's dead, I feel like he could mean anything to anybody else. People choose to not watch the sequel trilogy and not watch those, and that's not their like Luke Skywalker or anything too. But weirdly, I feel like usually death is a very much part of your legacy in some regard, and I feel like nobody really ever talks about his death unless they're complaining about it.
Yeah, and they should, because it was the perfect death for a Jedi. He died with peace, at peace with purpose, and using his knowledge for defense and using the Force for knowledge and defense, and not for attack. Like the poeticy. It is poetic, and I can't imagine them doing it much better with Yoda's original teachings, and then also the teachings he gave in The Last Jedi. Yoda's also a character that has a lot of legacy, because it's interesting how it's never like Yoda said this, or like we remember Yoda like this. Like, it's Yoda always showing up, but he's a million years old / actively dead, and it's like he can always just appear in this same role, that his legacy will never actually change like Luke Skywalker's does. That Yoda is like eternally this, because even in the High Republic, I've said that before, that I was excited to go back 200 and 400 years and see Yoda younger, and even then he's still the same old wise Jedi Master, because that's just who he is at all times in this mythology. Like, he's just always that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's like why. Sorry, Max. I feel like you have not spoken a word yet.
I'm just waiting to derail the conversations. You keep going.
I like the way, almost the opposite of that, Luke, is when with Obi-Wan, is that I feel like in Phantom Menace you get nuggets of who Obi-Wan is that we know of him, but in that movie specifically, he's like kind of like this young gun that I feel like is semi of a rule breaker. Even just him with like shorter hair and like just no beard. Like, I feel like he is the opposite of who we know him to be, with like little nuggets of who he's going to be. And then the rest of the time, Obi-Wan is very much the wise person who is kind of a grumpy guy that is trying to impart knowledge the entire time. But I like in Phantom specifically, we kind of get this rebellious other version of him. Also, kind of not the antithesis of Yoda, but obviously, like you said, Yoda's, besides he's being a little quirkier at the end of life for him.
I want to agree, but I never really have found that when I watch the prequels with Obi-Wan. He never, as much as I love the character and especially Ewan McGregor's portrayal, Obi-Wan never really has a satisfying character arc. Like John Williams came out of retirement, but for the Kenobi show to write the Kenobi theme because he never wrote one during the prequels because Obi-Wan's not that. I mean, he's a main character and he like does a lot of plot, but he doesn't do a lot of development or like the character of Obi-Wan, he just exists to affect other characters in the plot. And
Yeah.
I would have expected, like, I'm not, Phantom Menace came out when I was 2, so it's not like I was expecting this then, but I would expect in the prequels for him to be like more of a loose cannon and young buck like that. But when I watch the Phantom Menace, it's like he's basically the same as Alec Guinness Obi-Wan now. He's just younger, and he's not doing those same things that I wish I would see out of Obi-Wan because it would be a very
Yeah.
satisfying character arc to see him like that when he's younger and know what he grows into when he's older. Um,
But I do like the fact of Obi-Wan. Again, he slightly changes because of his age. He's like,
his
I
age
am-
changes. Yeah.
yes, but that's what I kind of like is that he is like, again, you get he's the same kind of person, right? He is consistently wise, but it's like he's a Padawan, so he can't really impart knowledge yet. He's still a sponge absorbing things, but he still has the same personality. But you're right, he doesn't have much of an arc. It's just like here he is as a Padawan, here he is as a Jedi Master, here he is as an old man, basically. Like it's kind of copy and paste. But I do like that fact that it's like unlike Luke Skywalker, where he goes and has this huge arc and he's this huge transformation. I feel like that is nice to see. Like he is the same person basically through all of this, which I think you have to be, especially with the stuff that Obi-Wan goes through. I feel like you have to have like strong morals, a strong moral compass in general to navigate all this terrible shit that's going to happen. But within himself, with his friends, with the galaxy, with the Jedi crumbling. And I feel
Obi-Wan,
like that's
he does have a very satisfying character arc, like off screen in the Clone Wars and books and comics, where I think it should have been explored more on screen. But the pressure he feels training the Chosen One, like that is an incredible amount of pressure, and he's not really up for it. Like he was still a Padawan at the time that Qui-Gon insisted that he train Anakin. Like, and I know the timeline works out that he was knighted and then took on a Padawan, but he was still young, probably too young. And then there's also an interesting story that can be told, which I guess Kenobi did kind of get into it, but not specifically, where like you trained Anakin, and by all accounts you failed. Like you can't chalk that up as anything else given what happened. And then you find out immediately after you fail, like after Anakin falls to the dark side, all the Jedi are killed. Yoda's like, "Hey, Qui-Gon can talk to us, and he wants to talk to you." It's like, wow, I would have way rather talked to him anytime in the last 10 years and not right now because it's I failed. Like that's the worst time. That's
Yeah.
the last thing I want to talk to him about, but it's definitely what I need to talk to him about most.
Yeah, I mean, as Luke said, the legacy of the Jedi is failure, and I feel like that is Obi-Wan. He is the embodiment of the Jedi. He is that figure for Anakin that
Mhm.
fails him and everything else. And obviously that arc is completed in Luke Skywalker's arc in The Last Jedi. But we're all standing on the shoulders of giants because Anakin and Palpatine, I think, are the two most important characters in all of Star Wars. In universe, their legacies are the ones that we deal with for all 9 movies. And it goes through Luke's character arc in The Last Jedi. I do want to go back to that real quick because it always kills me how people hate Luke Skywalker's arc in The Last Jedi and ironically claim that it ruins his legacy when what they wanted was this superhuman strength, ungodly like powered force using Luke, who is still the embodiment of good. He only does right. He knows no wrong. And to think that that wouldn't have any effect on a person for 30 some years, that somebody can just live up to that pressure, no problem, and be exactly what you want them to be. Going back to your example about Dave Grohl, like, oh my gosh, did you know that Dave Grohl had a secret kid? This ruins his legacy. It's like, well, yeah, because Dave Grohl's human. Like, everyone is human, and maybe we should stop idolizing these people because everyone makes mistakes, and you're always going to find out about something at some point. And the irony is that these people idolized Luke, and they wanted to see that version of him, and then the version that we got was Luke saying, I couldn't live up to the pressure. and then that disappointed a lot of people. And that is the most human story that they could have possibly told. I mean, yeah, they could have. This is a fantastical world. They didn't have to go that route. They could have said, yeah, Luke Skywalker is a god. But he's not. He's a legend, and he couldn't deal with his own legacy because too many people in universe were treating him as they do out of universe, which is as this unrealistic version of himself. But it's all, I mean, kind of going back, it's all an extrapolation of Anakin's legacy, and that's what Star
Mhm.
Wars is about. It is the Skywalker saga. Matt, you recently said that, with the Rise of Skywalker and bring back Palpatine, it seems kind of like it was a mistake because it almost made it the Palpatine saga, and I agree
Mhm.
with that. That's why I said that. I also think that's also probably the most important character in Star Wars after Anakin, because Star Wars at its core is a story of good versus evil. That's what George Lucas was all about. Today, more modern audiences will like these kind of more sophisticated gray stories like Andor, where those lines get blurred a little bit. But George Lucas was, no, it's a story of good versus evil. And Palpatine was the embodiment of evil. And Anakin, I think, was the embodiment of good. Obviously, he struggles with evil, kind of like every single person does. Again, going back to Dave Grohl, everyone makes mistakes. Nobody is perfect. And then it's all about redemption. So long story short, those are my thoughts.
There's one thing I want to piggyback off of when you're talking about Luke. Again, not to we should go forward obviously with Anakin and Palpatine. That's a ripe thing to dive into. But with Luke, you like you're saying, it's a human story, and everyone's kind of giving it gripe for um being a human being, and I think that is super true. Like, again, you kind of like, you either die, become what is the quote from the Dark Knight? You die the hero, or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain, and it's like semi-similar because, like you said, we all are human and we're gonna advance, and when you're on top, there's only down to go, and hopefully you get back on top again, and that's just kind of life. But it's funny because no one ever gave Han Solo any flack or that storyline, even though he's like an absent father that runs away from from everything. And it's like, oh, like that's actually, I mean, does Luke run away from everything because he has like a more, I guess, intense job in the fact that he has to protect the entire galaxy, I guess, to a point or something? But it's like, no, like Han like literally runs away when things get tough. And it's funny because nobody gives that goal for whatever reason. And I know it's like in his character, he just reverts back to who he was, kind of, which is also maybe more of a depressing story than Luke's, in the fact that Luke, like, crumbles under the pressure because he was maybe never built for it. But Han literally just reverts and learns nothing, I guess, apparently over 30 years. And I just always found that funny that nobody ever really cared. And the same thing with Leia, to be honest, right? She just is the same badass person. Like, she's not giving up on her son. She's not giving up on anything, but everyone abandons her, which is literally just like everything that happens to them 30 years ago, which is a really big bummer, actually. But yeah, I feel like that's, again, there's just people within this universe. I always find that funny. Those three storylines.
Not to give legitimacy to the anti Luke Skywalker in the Last Jedi crowd, but I do get why you would dislike Luke's arc and not dislike Han's arc for the same reason, because, like what I was saying before, the legacy out of universe of Luke Skywalker after the original trilogy, he was such a impactful figurehead, character to aspire to, and Han Solo never really was. Like, at his best, Han Solo was fun, but no one's saying, like, I want to be Han Solo when I raise my kids. It's like, you can be Han Solo when you're out at a party, but you don't want to, like, be Han Solo.
Han Solo's the fun uncle. You want to be a
Yeah.
little bit more stern. But at the same time, I also feel like if you saw Luke doing the same thing he was doing in Return of the Jedi, again, Luke in Return, to me, is a bit more bland. Like, he is too Gandalf the White. He is a little bit too, like, godly for me, where he's, like, such a rule binder. He's so strict. I feel like he's, like, much more robotic, I guess, literally. But, like, I also just feel like there's just something a little bit off, because that was the whole story, right? He advanced from movie to movie to movie, but it's like Luke in Empire, I think, is like the perfect combination where he's still funny, he's still that like farm boy growing up on Tatooine, but he's also becoming kind of this mythical Jedi. I think that's the perfect combination, and I think when Return, he's too far, removed from everything. He's very clerical, and I feel like if he was that version of himself in the new trilogy, it would just be no fun to watch. He'd be stoic and unfun at all. I just feel like there'd be no life in him. Where I feel like he kind of got some of that pizzazz back by getting. He kind of just became Mark Maron, to be honest. He's just an angry man. I'm surprised he didn't have a podcast on on the island by himself.
That conversation reminds me of what we were recently saying about Rey in the Rise of Skywalker when she dies and comes back, and it's like no part of me thought she was actually going to die, and that sort of takes you out of it. That's sort of how I feel about the Return of the Jedi, but only because of my experience with Star Wars, where I was, born in '97, so I grew up in a family of Star Wars fans, so I knew the whole story from start to finish before I was even old enough to watch movies. And so, like, watching Return of the Jedi, I know Luke's not gonna go to the dark side, but like in the beginning when he shows up in all black and force chokes some Gomorian guards, it's like, whoa, this isn't very Jedi-like of him. Maybe he is gonna go dark. And then, like, even in the throne room scenes when he like gives into his anger and starts slashing up on Vader and chops his hand off, it's like, it's hard for me to even imagine what it would have been like watching that live without any idea how the story is going to end, because as I'm watching it, I'm like, I know he's not going to do any of this. I don't know. And that's not fair to dislike that movie or criticize it for that purpose, but that's just my experience.
Yeah, and Rey's an important character to bring up too in the conversation of legacy, because obviously her whole character arc, I guess in the sequel trilogy, but especially in the Rise of Skywalker, when she found out that she was a Palpatine, was what is the legacy of that name? Are you born into this? Is this something that you choose? And I think it's something that they did well, but probably could have done better. But it goes back, like I said, down to Anakin. It's all the legacy of Anakin and what's his story. And obviously he struggled pretty badly with the dark side, but overcame it. Because that's the story of Anakin. It's all about the decisions that you make. And same thing with Luke. He struggled with the dark side in Jedi, like you were just talking about. And then he kind of struggled with the legacy of the Jedi more generally in The Last Jedi. And then he came back around to it and he redeemed himself. And then similarly, Rey, when she found out that she was a Palpatine, it was all kind of rushed because it was in one movie. But she had visions, she had doubts. She didn't know if she could trust herself when she thought that she accidentally killed Chewie. And so, what does it mean to be a Palpatine? What does it mean to be a Skywalker? Is this something that you are born into? Which I like the story in Star Wars that says that it's not about family, that it is about choices. Which is why I kind of wish that they told this story a little bit differently without making her a Palpatine. But it came around to the same conclusion, which is that no, it is a choice. Therefore, I'm going to choose to be a Skywalker. And it's like, okay, well, that's where people kind of start to give it a little.
Missed the point.
Yeah, it's like, well, yes and no. But I like the idea a lot, and Rey struggling with the concept of legacy.
I agree, and I think I also it's funny when you were talking about like legacy in the universe versus real world. I think that's where some of the things get disconnected with. Where we're talking about like Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Obi-Wan, all these characters that are in universe and out of universe in the real world are both perceived very well. And then in the new trilogy, in the sequel trilogy, Rey in universe is very important, obviously. That legacy is very important. The story is really important. But I think culturally in the real world, it then falls flat for some reason. And I think that's where the disconnect is like, I think you have to almost have both. Like, Luke Skywalker has to be so impactful in the universe, which he is, and then also outside of the universe, in the real world. And I think that's how that kind of works with a lot of things. And when things aren't perceived well, but you're told, like, hey, in this universe, they're so important. But it's like, well, I don't really like that character. Again, I like Rey, I like Finn, I like Poe, but it's like there's some sort of weird disconnect, and I'm not sure what that was with the legacy in the real world. Again, I don't know how things were handled. We always talk about this, but it's probably has to do a lot with like social media and everyone. And honestly, we've talked about this before, but like Star Wars just kind of expanding. Like I've said this a lot before, but I feel like I was made fun of a lot when I was a kid for liking Star Wars because there was like this weird nerdy thing. I still feel like back then, that wasn't necessarily as popular. I mean, obviously it's incredibly popular with a certain demographic, but I think, and obviously toy wise it exploded, but I feel like back in in 2005 I feel like it became even a bit more palatable versus 99 2002, But I feel like in 2015, I mean, in the midst of the MCU's height, I feel like is when when Star Wars comes back in, and I feel like Star Wars is a legacy in that regard. Everyone and their brother then was fans of Star Wars, which I don't know about your guys' experience, but for mine growing up, besides people like my friends that I knew, like no one else really liked Star Wars like at all, like or understood references or wanted to talk about it.
Well,
like
and I think that's
I feel
why
like there was me and a couple of kids.
I think that's why Ray's legacy out of universe is also going to be interesting because I'm sure people are having that exact same experience because what we think
Yeah.
was the reception of the sequel trilogy is based on what adults were saying at the time. Force Awakens came out 10 years ago. What the audience that's
Yeah.
going to go see the new Ray movie is going to consist of a large segment of people that grew up with Ray as their generation
Yeah.
of Jedi. And so I think our perception of what Ray's legacy is going to change with the new Ray movie. I think it's going to change over time because we've said it before, and I'll say it again when Star Wars episodes 10, 11, and 12 come out too. No one's going to like it at the time, but it's for kids. People are going to grow up with it, and then they're going to come around to it. And I have no doubt
Yeah.
the same thing is happening with Ray.
Yeah,
that's
we
why I
always
feel-
talk about that, how the young generation that grew up with the sequels will end up loving it. But like you said, The Force Awakens is 10 years old already. Like, that generation is already among us. Max and I were at Comic-Con in Chicago recently, and any cosplayer under 15 years old, I feel like, is a Rey. And the more I think about it, that's what I see whenever I go to conventions. Like, Rey is a massively popular character with young people, and obviously we're not that demographic, so we don't really recognize it. But that time is coming sooner than I think that the sequels are going to be cherished for, because also, like, for us to start appreciating the prequels, our generation, we had to get old enough and technology had to catch up to where we were talking. Like, we didn't have a platform to talk about our love of the prequels until our 20s. Kids have it now, like 8-year-olds have it
Yeah.
now. And so I do think it's going to happen much quicker, which is good. There's also a lot of bad that comes from that, but
Yes.
Observing the
I mean, there's also
cosplay,
something. Sorry, Max, go on.
I was just gonna say,
You're
observing the
talking
cosplay is
cosplay.
interesting because I recall when we were there, there was a family that I saw, and they all were in cosplay, and they were all wearing Mandalorian armor, except for the youngest kid was wearing wow, I can't think of Giancarlo Esposito's character's name. Gideon. He was
Grief
wearing
Karga? Oh, the Mando
No.
Gideon armor. Yeah.
he was wearing Gideon's
Grief Karga.
Mandalorian armor.
I'm not racist.
And I was like, oh, that's kind of like a weird clash. Like, you guys are Mandalorians and he's gonna be like the bad guy. Like, oh, just be Mandalorians, like, be consistent. But I was thinking about that and I was like, that's probably that kid's favorite character because this is a young kid who probably hasn't seen a whole lot of Star Wars, but he has seen The Mandalorian and he does know
Season 3. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
which is the worst received season of The Mandalorian, and this kid probably likes it the best because it has some of the coolest action and it has Moff Gideon in armor where he looks sick, and that's probably what's important to this
Mhm.
kid right now. So this kid's growing up with Moff Gideon as probably his favorite character of all time, and people like us are, poo-pooing season 3 of The Mandalorian, but yeah, it evolves over time.
There's also something like what we were just talking about too, and I mean the ultimate legacy thing. I think everyone gives like the MCU so much credit for what they were able to do for 10 years basically being on top, but I feel like no one gives enough credit to what Star Wars did. And like talk about legacy, it's like whether you like it or not, it's like a really special thing that you actually were able to start this thing in 77 with A New Hope and then also bring those characters back, all three of them, at least for a little bit. I mean, it was so close to being perfect in the fact for Carrie Fisher. But I mean, like, that's a rarity that like anything like that can be that big and you can get all those people back. I mean, you can even get, Billy D. Williams back and stuff too. Anthony Daniels, like John Williams, all these people were still around to be able to make these three other films. I think that is like incredibly important, and that's like one of the biggest things in legacy. And it's like something that people I think take for granted. It's like maybe you didn't like what they did with those characters, but like they did it though. Like that's insane to actually think about. Like, and the only thing you're able to do is like wait and have time. And there's not been like really nothing else like that. I mean, you can look at like Star Trek, and they combined Next Gen and the original trilogy, and they had those movies and stuff too. But I think on this level, in this scope, that is good. And also, it makes me feel good that the sequels can come around. I also just feel bad. I mean, like, the actors are paid millions of dollars and blah blah blah, but it's like, I feel like John Boyega is having a really tough time with Star Wars lately, and I feel it's like I don't give him. It makes a lot of sense, I guess, why you're living that day in and day out. And I like, yeah, that he isn't getting the credit he needs or deserves. I don't think. Needs is a little harsh. No one needs anything, but he deserves more credit, I think, too. And then, moving into we're talking about obviously like a lot of characters in movies and the bigger legacy thing, but some of the newer characters I also wanted to see, like the legacy, because it just exploded with Grogu and Din Djarin with the Mandalorian, and so I want to see like what you guys think of like those, like that legacy. Like, is it going to be? I feel like when you think of Star Wars, if you named one character, like for me, it would be Luke Skywalker. Like that, I mean, right? Like that's just like the character I think of. But I feel like for a lot of people now, it's Grogu, and I feel like most people who think Grogu still call him Baby Yoda, because I'm not sure how much they like Star Wars or how much they like the merch they're buying on Hot Topic, basically.
Yeah, I mean, Grogu came out of nowhere to be the face of Star Wars.
Yeah.
5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, and I'd argue that he still is today. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think there's one singular. I think he has surpassed Darth Vader in terms of the general public's. When someone talks about Star Wars, I think most people think Grogu before even Darth Vader, because he's just so massively popular in the real world. In universe, he's a fine character. I'm excited
Yeah.
to see where he goes, and he's hella cute. But out of universe, he's a massive phenomenon.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Which is
wouldn't-
insane.
100% agree with that. Because if you ask me one Star Wars character, I would say Darth Vader. But I agree that all of these current branding and marketing around Star Wars uses the iconography of Grogu and Mandalorian significantly more than they do Darth Vader at
Yeah.
this point. Yeah, Grogu is Star Wars.
I wonder
I almost-
if I know there's not a way to get this question answered to me right now. I don't even know how I would go about collecting this data, but I wonder if we're reaching a point where Grogu's popularity has surpassed Yoda's, where obviously it has, but to the point where there's a substantial portion of people that could see Baby Yoda and they would call the other one old Baby Yoda and not know that that's just Yoda. Like, you see what I'm getting
That'd
at?
make
Like,
me
people that
so
are familiar with
depressed.
Baby Yoda but actually don't know who Yoda is.
That person's parents raised them wrong. This is the thing. That person didn't show them in the correct order of how they should watch Star Wars. This is the problem. That would be depressing, I think, if that actually happened. But I'm sure there's people like that. I mean, there's also, any way you want to get into Star Wars, that's fine too. That's too harsh unless your parents are Star Wars fans. Then you're raised wrong. But
Well, going
There's
back to Ray
interesting-
before we get
yeah.
too far away, because I had a few more
Yeah,
points that I wanted
please.
to talk about, because Ray has 3 movies that deal
Yep.
with legacy. Where in like the first 1 and 2, I guess it's about the same, where the whole point is that she is a nobody and she comes from nothing and she has no place in the story. And I don't know why robots keeps coming into my head. Maybe it's the Ewan McGregor angle where it's like, you can shine no matter what you're made of. And that's a great story and theme to tell kids and any audience that, like, you don't have to be somebody to be somebody. And I love that. And then obviously The Rise of Skywalker doesn't undo it, but it does change her legacy to what it is as a Palpatine and then as a Skywalker. And I think if it's like the same thing with Luke Skywalker, where you thought his legacy was one thing and then it's something else, and that's because people don't stop existing once their legacy has peaked. You keep experiencing life and you change and you grow, and sometimes for the worse, and whatever happens, it still happens. With Rey, it's a little more jarring because instead of 30 years, 40 years, 1977 to 2017 was 40 years. For Luke Skywalker, or I guess it was 83 to 77. So 34 years of thinking he was one thing and then learning he's another. It's a tough pill to swallow for some people. And then it's sort of the opposite with Rey, where for 2 years you thought she was one thing and then it turns out she's another. And that's also a tough pill to swallow for similar reasons, but kind of different. And on the one hand, it's like, well, damn, can we never change anyone's legacy? Like, are people not allowed to continue to grow after they have a character arc in a movie? But on the other hand, I do understand the jarring nature of experiencing A and then flipping to B over the course
Yeah.
of just 2 years. But just because that happens, The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi still exist. It's not like The Rise of Skywalker came out and erased those two movies from existence. Like you can stop watching the movies after The Last Jedi and just take the Rey is a nobody lessons and themes and legacy going forward. Or you can watch The Rise of Skywalker and take the Palpatine and Skywalker legacies going forward. Or you can watch all three and then just pick and choose whatever kind of lesson you want to take forward, because they all exist, albeit it would have been nicer if they all existed together. But that doesn't stop that they exist.
Yeah, I
It's like the DC comics, which I recently learned at Comic-Con. I was talking to a guy because I got into DC Comics with the New 52 launch in like 2011, which is when they restarted their universe. And then they restarted it again in like 2015, and it was early. And apparently they've continued doing stuff like that, and they have like a choose your own continuity structure to their universe where you can like choose which universe you follow, which just really boggled my mind as a Star Wars fan, like the idea of that. But why not? Like that, we basically have that with Legends and canon. Like you can choose your own continuity, and people do. People prefer Legends to canon, which I don't. But if you want that version of Luke Skywalker, like pop off. That's your version of Luke Skywalker. That's not the canon version of Luke Skywalker, and it's not the version that I prefer or care about. But yeah, choose your own continuity. Why not? Take whatever lessons you want.
Yeah, and I don't do a
fine.
good enough job
That's
of keeping
true.
up with that, but I know that everyone always says, because they do the same thing with Marvel too. They say the Ultimate Universe is the best one for Marvel, and in DC it's the absolute. But yeah, and I agree with you. Going back to Rey, episodes 7 and 8 are still there, and there is still that through line of this theme, like you said, comparing it to robots, of you can be whoever you want to be. It's just
Comparing it to robots, nice.
it's just jarring. Yeah, when you go, you can be whoever you want to be for episode 7, then episode 8, you can be whoever you want to be for episode 8, and then episode 9, it's like, you're Palpatine. But you can still be whoever you want to be. It's like, okay, so it's still, like, you're the same, the message is still there. Like, it is the same. You're just kind of switching up how you're telling it all of a sudden, which is kind of like my gripe with it. Because I think, for the sake of consistency alone, they should have just kept it with her being a nobody, and she still could have claimed to have been a Skywalker at the end. And that could have still been like the whole thing, like. But whatever. I digress. That's my own personal thing. The story is still there, that you can be whoever you want to be, and that it's about the choices you make.
It's like a fun but strict parent who's like, you can do whatever you want to do. You can grow up and be a musician. That's totally fine. And then you get to start applying to colleges, and they're like, you're going to be an engineer though, because you need to make money and pay off these student loans. Like, you need to have a job. It's like, yeah, you can do whatever. You can do whatever. You can do whatever. And then it's like high school senior year comes along, and you're like, okay, buckle down, fucko.
It is like that. That's funny.
I was though going off the Rey thing for one last little tangent, is that I feel like Grogu has the almost opposite reaction of Rey, and the fact that Grogu and Din Djarin are so big outside of the universe, in our real world, that when you watch Mandalorian, and if you're like, I know so many people that like are obsessed with Mandalorian, and they don't even know his real name. They don't know his name was Din Djarin. They don't know they know Grogu because people have told them a million times that it's Grogu, but they just call him Baby Yoda. And I'm sure we've all had conversations where like, yeah, but I still call him Baby Yoda, and it's like, oh, yeah. But then they watch Mandalorian and they're like let down almost, I think, to the point where it's like, oh, this is just like such a small show in comparison to when you're used to watching Star Wars. Things are so big and so expansive, that I think when you watch Mandalorian, you're like, oh, it's like these characters are very important to this story, and there's a little bit that goes outside of that, obviously with the cloning and Grogu and like what his implications could be, but like it is not the Death Star, blowing up planets. And so I think when people watch Mandalorian for the first time, being fans and understanding what that kind of legacy outside of the world is. And when you watch it, you're like not disappointed, but I know a lot of people that are like, yeah, I didn't really love it as much as I thought. So I just chose not to watch the rest of it because I prefer like the culture, I guess, and the merchandising around Mando and Grogu, which is like a really weird. I don't know if you guys have run into this or not, but I've run into it a couple times with like family, friends, or other people, and it's like a really weird dynamic. They're like, I tried to watch Mando, I just didn't love it. It's like, okay, well, I see that you have like a Grogu license plate and keychain and everything, and just watch the show. Like it's just so confusing to me. But it's almost the opposite, like I said, of like where Rey so important in the universe, but not as well perceived outside in the real world, versus Mandalorian Grogu are completely opposite.
Yeah, that is a really interesting comparison, and I agree entirely. Because whenever people criticize Rey, it's always like, "Oh, well, she is a Mary Sue. She wins all her fights and never has any struggles." And I'm just like, "But did you watch the movies? Because it seems like you haven't." And then when people talk about Grogu, they're like, "Oh, he's the best character in all of Star Wars." I'm like, "But did you watch the show? Because he's fine. Like the first two seasons revolve around him. The third one, he's just kind of there. Like he's an okay character. He's hella cute, but
yes, I think that's the thing is people are getting confused with cuteness. They're getting cuteness confusion. And the same thing with Mandalorian is like Din Djarin. We talk about this podcast all the time. He is not good at his job. Like he should be a stay-at-home dad. Like he is not very good. Like he is not good at what he does every single time. And I feel like people are expecting something. I mean, I turn around and say the same thing about myself with Boba Fett, but in Book of Boba Fett. But I mean, talk about legacy there, which is an interesting thing too. And I don't know how long we're going right now, or how much we can talk in circles about every single character we've talked about a million times. But like Boba Fett is like the perfect example of legacy, and the fact that he has no implication in the universe, and yet a huge implication in the real world. Which I feel like then there's expectations when you go back to that character. You have to make him really important in that universe, and then it could fail. But he's still the best action figure.
I remember there's the Honest trailer, I think, that said the joke like C-3PO and R2-D2 don't matter anymore because K-2SO and BB-8 are the same but cooler and we like them better, which was true to an extent in 2016, but then K-2SO was never in anything else. But Mando, I feel like, has completely replaced Boba Fett in pop culture. Like Boba Fett 6 years ago was probably second or third or fourth most popular Star Wars character, and now, however popular he was, I feel like that's all just shifted to Mando, and it doesn't help that Boba Fett's movie or show wasn't very well received and his character changed a good amount. But Boba Fett used to be wildly popular, and now I don't see much Boba Fett love, and I see an incredible amount of Mando love.
I agree. I wonder if it's, do you think it's, I know not to diss the show too much either, but do you think it has anything to do with the show as well? Like Mandalorian comes out, he's very cool. He's a new Mandalorian, obviously. Different armor, very flashy. But then you bring on Book of Boba Fett, which kind of like undoes a couple things that you would think about Boba Fett as a character. And then it's like all of a sudden they're here, and then Book of Boba Fett comes in, and then all of a sudden, Boba Fett's lowering a little bit. Do you think that has anything to do with it? Like, as a fan of the show,
it's got to. Like, I can't deny that that's not a factor. I mean, several things. Like, I personally think Mandalorian's armor looks cooler than Boba Fett's. Like, if I'm just looking at them side by side, I prefer the look of Mando. That's pretty subjective. His show is definitely better, and it also helps, and I can't deny that maybe a quarter of the Grogu merch that is so unbelievably popular also happens to feature Mandalorian, so he gets a bit of that tangential fame from people just being more exposed to him because they're so exposed to Grogu. And so, I mean, all these things in conjunction, I think it just, Boba Fett really just got replaced entirely in pop culture by Mando. Obviously not entirely. Like, I still see Boba Fett cosplays, and people still like Boba Fett. I have a Boba Fett wall over there, and I don't like Mando as much as a character. I don't know, but Mando's crazy popular, and Boba's on his way down.
Yeah,
but do you think that would have had the same effect on Boba Fett had the show been better?
I don't know, because I feel like it needs to have been better and maybe kept his same armor, because I feel like not in terms of like story and better and worse in universe and stuff, like just in terms of toy and pop culture and popularity, I feel like having two different armor sets of equal renown, equal-ish, like one that you primarily wear and one that is old that people are more familiar with. Like I feel like that hurts your popularity. Like I'm thinking of Daredevil, how he had a yellow suit for the first 6
Mhm.
issues, and then he switched to red, and it's like, but he had red then for the next 60 years, and he just went back to yellow for that 1 or 2 episodes of She-Hulk, and it's like a fun throwback. Like if you keep showing Daredevil in equal parts in red suit and in yellow suit, it like separates the public's mind into thinking they're two different characters and each only deserving of half as much appreciation and popularity. Whether that's true or not, obviously I'm just spitballing here, but I feel like that sort of is what happened with Boba Fett, you know?
Mm.
Am I making any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think I agree with that. I think it was kind of an unsuccessful rebranding of Boba Fett. And I think it hurts the fact that the show also wasn't that great. But I do think that it would have had the same effect even if the show was better. Because Mandalorian is also just literally shinier and newer. And so I think it makes sense that people would start to gravitate towards that a little bit more. And part of the appeal to Boba Fett was that he was this mysterious character that you didn't really know much about. So I think the more content that we got of him, the more that mystery would kind of fade away, and the more people would probably gravitate to Mandalorian anyway.
I think underrated is out of this conversation is Jango Fett. I feel like nobody talks about Jango Fett anymore. And I think he was, as a prequel, growing up with those movies, huge. Also a great action figure. I feel like he was the action figure for our generation, and I feel like he has gone by the wayside. And I was like, well, Jango Fett was also silver, and he had purple with him.
Blue. He was silver and blue, but he also carried 2 guns, which is so much cooler than one. I prefer Jango to Boba for sure.
Yeah, we
But-
know.
And
We
I
saw.
think
We
that's
know the
wild,
rankings.
but yeah, we know that.
I agree.
But the like Jango Fett's legacy is, I would say, negligible next to both
Yeah,
Mandalorian and Boba Fett, or most Star Wars characters. Like he doesn't have a legacy.
No, it introduces
even though
Tem to
you-
us.
Yeah, even though I prefer Jango, I can't even like advocate that he should have a legacy. Like I'm fine with that legacy being Boba Fett's legacy. Like
Yeah.
similar to what I was saying about Daredevil, I think if you tried to put Jango and Boba in equal parts out into the world, that both would suffer for it.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to see more Jango Fett content, to be honest, now that I'm saying it out loud. Give me that Tales of the Fets or some shit. Give me
Tales of the Bounty
3
Hunters
episodes.
with Jango Fett. That'd be awesome.
Give me 3 eps. Maybe a little bit more. Anyway,
Or Tales of
talk
the
about Legacy.
Mandalorians, and they could do Jango Fett and Prime Mando. What's his name? The original one that was a Jedi that had the dark saber. What was his name?
I don't know.
This is our second episode we're recording tonight. This is gonna kill us when this episode comes out in a few weeks.
Yeah, I'm not gonna like rewatching and listening to me stumble over everything in the beginning of this episode. I already regret it. Part of me in the 5 minutes in was like, should we just wrap it up? Should we just do this another time? But I think we got on track a little bit. I can talk about Legacy all day. I can talk about these characters all day. But I feel like we could wrap it up. What do you guys think? Do you guys have anybody else to talk about
Tar
off the
Vizsla.
top
Nope.
of your sack?
Tar Vizsla.
Mm. We think
Sorry,
Paz Vizsla
I had to
too?
look that up, and otherwise it would have killed me.
I was thinking Pre Vizsla. Who's Pre Vizsla?
Pre Vizsla is John Favreau's character.
Well,
That's
then
Paz Vizsla, I thought.
who's Paz Vizsla?
Paz
Vizsla
Vizsla
was
is also
Jon
John
Favreau, I
Favreau's
thought.
character. Paz Vizsla is the Mandalorian. He's the
Oh,
big
the ones in the
Mandalorian.
Clone Wars and ones in the Mandalorian.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is
That's
confusing.
annoying.
That is.
And then Tar
Although,
Vizsla
I
was the
think
old one.
John Favreau played Paz Vizsla in like season 1 of The Mandalorian, but not again because I think they did get a different actor once they started to like have more parts. Like I think when they filmed his death scene, that was not John Favreau playing him.
I think it was only his voice all along, though. It wasn't him in the suit anyway.
I'm seeing that Tor Vizsla is a Legends character. Who did you say was the old Mandalorian Jedi?
Tar Vizsla.
Tar Vizsla.
Tarre.
Tar Vizsla. Okay, yeah. All right.
You guys think it's worth buying the Boba Fett 40th anniversary Empire Strikes Back helmet for $100? Because I bought the re-armored version and I regret it every day of my life looking at it versus the 40th anniversary one.
Life's too short to live with regret, Matt. Get the new one. Get the one you want.
I support that.
All right, I'll tell Lynn if she has any questions. Hey, it's tax day, baby. They give away when we're recording.
Don't remind me.
Anyway, does anybody have? You didn't pay your taxes yet, Max? What are you?
No,
Anyway,
it's a long thing. I don't want to hear this. I'm not going to give evidence to the IRS right now.
I'm very interested in that. The story.
I follow every law that was ever written personally.
I'm very interested, Max, and you had a bender in Chicago buying Star Wars merch, but you didn't pay your taxes. Anyway, does anybody have any force for thought before Max goes to jail?
I do. I was watching A New Hope, and as you know, Alderaan gets blown up. Horrible day for Bail and Breha Organa. They get killed in an instant. That sucks. But the few days prior, Leia gets abducted or kidnapped or taken hostage by Vader, who informs the Imperial to order them to send a distress beacon and inform the Senate that all aboard were killed. So that means Bail and Breha Organa think that Leia died, and then they start planning funeral arrangements, and then they die?
Ooh,
That is so much worse than just being blown up.
In their final minute,
That
they're
is
like, well,
somber.
at least we'll be reunited with our daughter once again. And then they get to Force Heaven, and they're not even there either.
Yeah, that
Man,
sucks.
That is.
Hmm.
Or is it better that you're like, oh, at least she's alive still? For now?
Yeah,
Maybe
I don't
one
know.
day, maybe they're like, maybe one day she'll pass away at a base under a sheet.
I was just watching that, and when Vader had that line, I was like, oh, that's a good idea. And then it dawned on me, like, oh my god, this is devastating. Like, that is the worst 2 to 3 days imaginable, I think.
Yeah. I made a
You hear that your
Yeah, that
daughter
is
is
dark.
dead, and then grieve, and then blow up.
I made a TikTok a long time ago about
Oof.
the 2 seconds before Alderaan was blown up, about how they must have felt like a moment of reprieve when they thought that the Empire was retreating, and they were just like, "Hey, look, they're looking
Everyone's
around
leaving."
like all the stormtroopers left. There's no more Star Destroyers here. This is great." And then they look up and they see the Death Star in the sky, and they're like, "What's that?" So you know, there's a little silver lining there for them. I think. I don't know.
They had that moment of joy that the Empire left for however long. Yeah.
Except I got a lot of comments on it saying that the darker part of that story was that the Empire almost certainly didn't evacuate before they blew it up, which I don't know. I find that hard to believe just at a logistical level. I mean, that's a lot of money you're wasting there. A lot of money and manpower.
I was going to say the same thing. If you're thinking of, sure, they don't care about their people, but if we know anything about, wealthy people, they're going to care about their equipment, and those are not cheap. It's like, how much do missiles cost, let alone the thing that launches the missiles? So it's a lot of money. It's quite a bit.
Oh, boy. That is interesting. Do I think that the Empire evacuated their forces from Alderaan before blowing it up? And if so, how many? Because they certainly, it would take like a day to evacuate everything. And Tarkin showed up kind of like on a whim. It wasn't really on a whim. I guess he might have been planning it the whole time ever since she got captured.
Yeah.
Well, but what if she did reveal the location of the hidden base, and it was not a remote planet, and it would have been satisfactory to send a message to the rest of the planet? Would he have just blown up that planet, or was he always going to blow up Alderaan?
Did he know that she was lying when she said Dantooine? That could have been the truth.
No, he doesn't, but he says that Dantooine is far too remote to send an example to the rest of the galaxy,
Mm-hmm.
but we'll deal with your rebel friends later.
Dang, Luke,
So you
you're
want-
Yeah, so
throwing...
whether she told the truth or not, it was gonna blow up. So it would have been premeditated. They would have had.
But no,
to
what
do
if she
that.
told the truth and it was a heavily populated planet? Or what if she lied and it was a heavily populated planet, I guess?
Isn't
That's
Alderaan a heavily
interesting.
populated planet? I think they would have blown it up as well and not thought twice about it.
Exactly. Well, the reason he blew up Alderaan was because it was heavily populated, and so it would send a message to the rest of the galaxy that they can and will blow up planets. So what if Leia provided him a different heavily populated planet to blow up? Would he have still blown up Alderaan?
Yes.
I think yes.
Yeah, right? I think so too.
Just
But
because
it's a
fuck
gut-
Leia?
It's a gut thing. Yeah. And they were already there. They
It's
were
a
in the
gut thing.
system.
They weren't there. They went there.
I mean, when he was talking to her, they were overlooking it. That was what made her say Dantooine.
That's true. Yeah, the fact that he was already there, I don't think he would have left.
Yeah,
It just sounds like he's
he
just
was,
lazy.
He was there
Just,
with purpose.
nah. I don't have to plug it.
Oh, we're already here.
She gives it up way too easily. Leia, you are going to Dantooine. They're on Dantooine. Like, damn it. All right, well, still sit for a second because I got to show you something.
I gotta show you something. All right, anyway. Want to take us out, anybody? I've never taken us out before. I like when you guys do it.
Well, let us know what you think. Let us know how you feel about Legacy or whether or not you think Tarkin would have blown up Alderaan regardless, and whether any troops were there. You can reach out to us across social media at Force for Thought, and you can email us at forceforthought@gmail.com.
And let us know what you think our legacy will be. See you, Sammy.